guys, what's up? So I'm just driving home from a doctor's appointment right now, and I kind of wanted to talk about something that you probably know I've ranted about many times before, and that is trolls. Specifically, trolls within not just the Star Wars fandom, which I've complained about the most, but believe it or not, the trolls in the JFK assassination research community. So let's talk about that and my experiences and views on them, okay? So, in a nutshell, I'd like to give you a short little rundown, essentially. It's no secret that there is an enormous divide and controversy within those two communities, okay? With Star Wars, the divide and controversy stems from the fact that, there's two different sides to the fandom, and really has been since all the way back in 1999 with the release of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. One side, of course, was, the people who liked Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and did like the Star Wars prequel trilogy, and then, of course, there was the side that relentlessly hated on it and attacked George Lucas for years and years, saying disgusting, immature things like he ruined Star Wars and ruined and/or raped their childhoods with the infamous song by the punk band Hot Waffles, George Lucas Raped My Childhood, which was a whole part of the 2011 documentary, The People versus George Lucas. Pathetic and disgusting, I know. And, as someone who's been a Star Wars fan for 20 years, since 2001, I'm from the prequel trilogy generation. The prequels were my generation's Star Wars. As a kid, I grew up on not just them, but the original trilogy on VHS, all 6 of those first movies, meant a lot to me, and like so many countless people around the world, captured my imagination, because that's really essentially what the Star Wars universe is. It's a fairy tale. It's an adventure fantasy story that happens to be set in space, but it's the divide in the fandom that to this day won't go away. And I mean, you could make the obvious, face value argument that, oh, well, of course there's, a divide in something as huge as that, in a, movie franchise as huge as that. Of course there's going to be a divide between fans who like and dislike certain things. Of course, that's a given with any friggin' pop culture phenomenon or franchise. That's true. It exists with DC and Marvel, with Doctor Who, with Lord of the Rings, with Harry Potter. All of those fandoms and franchises have, fandoms that are divided and have different opinions and points of view on different aspects of those franchises. Of course, I agree. But Star Wars takes the cake as probably the most divisive out of all of those franchises and fandoms, because not only has it been around for so long, but it just had such a long-lasting effect and impact on movies and on pop culture in general, But anyway, to get back to the fandom, I think it has a lot to do with generations, like specifically what generation of Star Wars fan are you, and how did you get exposed and introduced to it? Obviously, like I said, for me, I'm a prequel trilogy generation, or a member of that. So the prequels were my generation Star Wars. The generation before me had the originals, and this generation has the sequels, Episode 7, 8, and 9. And, the sad thing about it is that there are really people on both sides of the fandom, positive and negative side, who have a bad habit of taking the movies and the franchise as a whole way too seriously and personally. And, Episode 8, The Last Jedi, was a perfect example of that, how the older generation of fans and middle-aged fans hated it so much because it essentially moved away from the formula of Star Wars and tried to do something different. And, of course, in their view, was just ruined by modern-day politics and social themes, which I don't really think is a valid criticism, considering, socio-political themes and elements have always been a part of Star Wars from the beginning, and George Lucas has said so. But I think beyond that, it's just the fact that, that movie didn't really go, the way people were hoping and envisioned. And, I mean, granted, it didn't really go at all the way I wanted or was hoping for either, but I didn't hate it for that. I loved it for that reason. I loved that it didn't meet my expectations at all and completely did its own thing. I have huge respect for Rian Johnson for doing that, because, with a franchise and fandom as vast and, long-lasting as Star Wars, there's a ton of expectation among the critics and fans that comes with that. And, that's the same for every pop culture fandom and franchise. But with Star Wars, the problem is that the fandom just takes it too personally and too seriously when a show or movie doesn't go the way they want, and they just throw temper tantrums like children and thus attack the filmmakers when that movie or show doesn't go their way. And they did it with George Lucas in the prequels, and are doing it with J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson, and Kathleen Kennedy with the sequels. And it's pathetic and disgusting because the fans, or so-called self-proclaimed fans, as I call them, even though they don't behave like fans at all, because they're so negative and toxic and so entitled, they just take it way too seriously and personally, to the point where they've went so far as to send the filmmakers death threats. And the prequel haters and critics did the same thing with George Lucas, so it's essentially history repeating itself. And as a longtime fan, that not only pisses me off, but more so than anything else, breaks my heart, because of how much Star Wars means to me and how it means so much to everybody. Longtime and casual fans. Obviously, especially longtime fans. And the sad part is, or the really extra sad part is, I hate to admit that I used to be a prequel trilogy hater, mainly back in high school for a couple of years, because I was sort of manipulated and brainwashed into taking the criticisms of the prequels way too seriously and personally, and I just blindly believed their, propaganda points, that hated on those movies, without really thinking for myself. Essentially is what happened. I wasn't really viewing the prequels from my own unbiased, independent perspective. But then, after Episode 8, The Last Jedi came out, and I saw all the hate it received, and the disgusting negative things that, people said about it, arguably worse than what was said about the prequels, I felt ashamed of myself and essentially realized, oh my god, I became literally this. These people are the thing that I became, and they're saying the exact same things that I did and all the haters of the prequel trilogy did. And it made me feel so ashamed of myself that I insulted not only George Lucas, but the people who enjoyed the prequels, the fans of them. And, the fact that I grew up with them and I used to be one, and then I just jumped on this bandwagon of toxic hate and entitlement. But then after The Last Jedi, I decided to take a step back and look at myself and realize, oh my god, I am literally just as bad as them. So in that moment, I vowed to give the prequels a second chance, and I'm glad I did, and now I like them. And I apologized, for what I said about George Lucas and the fans of those movies, and I'm glad I did. And especially after watching the Clone Wars, I have a whole new viewpoint of that, of the prequels. The Clone Wars 3D show made me appreciate the prequels much more. Now, on the other side of the coin, with trolls in the JFK assassination community, it's a very different kind of trolls. Entitlement and toxicity is not so much the issue with them as it is ignorance and arrogance of the facts and the evidence. Okay? Now, the trolls, mostly, not all, but most of them are on the side who believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was guilty. Or Warren Commission defenders, or lonenutters as we call them. And their problem, and the reason why they're trolls, is because they just resort to constant personal insults and attacks on literally anyone who believes there was a conspiracy. Anyone! Regardless of what you think the extent of the conspiracy was, and regardless of your knowledge and research and background know-how of the assassination and the evidence, regardless of what you believe, of what theory or story relating to the assassination you believe, they will insult you constantly, calling you conspiracy theorist, paranoid, nutcase, un-American, unpatriotic, communist, all the above. Now, granted, even though I haven't been studying the assassination for as long as others, I've only been studying it for 7.5 years, I've been called all of those just because I don't agree with the government's whole conclusion. Now, to be fair, just like Star Wars and the prequels, I, for many, many years, used to think that Lee Harvey Oswald was guilty because, it's just what we were all taught to believe. It's what we were all told happened. As a kid, I had no reason to question it, and I just blindly believed it because that's what my history teachers and what the news media said. I had no reason to doubt it, but at the same time, that's mainly because of the fact that back then I knew nothing about it. All I knew was the basics: Lee Harvey Oswald, JFK in a car, shots from a building. That's it. Literally all I knew. Back then, I knew no details whatsoever. I didn't even know the names of witnesses, the location, the time, the date. I didn't know any of that. Now, after studying it for 7.5 years, I do. But again, if I'm going to be completely unbiased and fair and honest, I was just like them. And I even went so far as avoided watching the famous Oliver Stone movie about it. Yeah, I avoided watching the Oliver Stone movie for years because of how hardcore I believed that Lee Harvey Oswald was guilty. But it wasn't until November 2013, the 50th anniversary, 7.5 years ago, when I saw this documentary where I had a light bulb kind of moment, and I realized, oh my God, there are actually people out there who don't believe Oswald was guilty? Like, really? Really? Well, maybe I should look into this myself, Maybe I should independently study and research the assassination myself and see whatever conclusion I can come up with. Whether that's for Oswald's guilt or for conspiracy. Whatever conclusion I end up drawing, I'll just base it on whatever information I find or learn. And that's what I did. I went in with literally no background knowledge, no biases, no preconceived notions. My mission and my thought was, okay, I'm going to look at every piece of evidence I can get my hands on, anything. I'll read as many books as possible, watch as many documentaries as possible, interviews, and look at as many photographs and films as I can, because, it was such a widely photographed and filmed crime. And so that's what I did. That's how I started. And again, I didn't go in thinking I was going to find evidence for or against Oswald's guilt. I didn't. Or for or against conspiracy at all. I went in with a completely open mind, and after about 2 years, my arrogance got the better of me, and I thought I learned everything. And, you know, it was a, conspiracy with at least, 2 assassins, even though my initial conclusion was at least 3 or 4. But then I realized I was so arrogant, and there was actually a lot I didn't bother to look into in those first 2 years, that I decided to keep on studying it and never stop. And at this point, I've learned so much that it has affected me so much psychologically. And I'm sure, for all the men and women who have been studying this way longer than me, some of them as far back as when it happened in 1963, men and women who have been studying it for that long, had the same thing happen to them. They initially believed, Oswald was guilty at first, but then when they dug so deep into the evidence, it just didn't add up. Specifically, the evidence against him and for his guilt. Now, granted, again, if I'm going to be fair, and if I'm going to be unbiased and honest, the evidence for Oswald's guilt is very strong and very convincing on the surface, when you look at it at face value, right? But the difference is, when you look below the surface and start to compare it against other evidence and other sources, you'll start to notice a pattern of contradictions and inconsistencies that it just doesn't add up, and you'll find that a majority of the evidence against him really is purely circumstantial and way too convenient, that I think, had there been a trial, it wouldn't have got very far. If Oswald had lived and had gone to trial with all those inconsistencies in the evidence against him, I guarantee that any judge in Texas probably wouldn't have bothered to go forward with the case and have been like, okay, all this evidence really doesn't add up. Even though, of course, knowing what I know now about how the authorities went so far as to fabricate evidence and intimidate witnesses, and went so far as to coerce them, they probably would have had the trial rigged against him and put him away for life. But I mean, with the evidence that's out now, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, and thanks to thousands of documents that were declassified thanks to Oliver Stone's movie, and the law that was passed because of it, and the hard work of independent everyday citizens and investigators like Mark Lane, Jim Mars, Sylvia Marr, David Lifton, all of them, with the evidence that exists today, it's basically a fact that Oswald was innocent. With all the information we have available now, thanks to not only Oliver Stone's movie in 1991 and the law that was passed because of it, and all the documents that Trump declassified in 2017, which was mandated by the law that was passed because of Oliver Stone's movie, thank God. Even though Trump didn't declassify all of them, he declassified 2,891, and records show that there's probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions, still classified and or missing or destroyed. Yeah, that in and of itself is suspicious and proves there's more to the story. Because, logically, if you think about it, had Oswald been guilty, there would have been absolutely no reason to hide this evidence away from the public, That in and of itself suggests there's more to the story. But, of course, those who blindly believe and still believe that Oswald was guilty ignore that and say, oh no, there's nothing suspicious, he did it unequivocally, it's been proven time and time again by experts and government investigators and so forth, and blah 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 blah. Well, In reality, that's really not the case at all. But again, to get back to the trolls or the lone nutters, the people who blindly believe Lee Harvey Oswald was guilty, to get back to them, the reason why they're trolls is because that whenever you debate them on this case, they never or rarely defend Oswald's guilt with the evidence. What they do is just resort to personal attacks and insults and will call you conspiracy theorist, unpatriotic, un-American, communist, paranoid, and crazy and insane, and never defend their position and twist the evidence to fit their belief, as well as claim that every piece of evidence that we bring up when we debate them is wrong and fake. Yeah. They're that immature that they will say that every piece of evidence that we bring up is fake or wrong. Why? Just because the government's experts said so? Just because you believe so? If they were unbiased, then they would have, at least given us a chance to explain why we think our evidence is legitimate, And really, that's the case for any issue. When it comes to debating any issue, the problem with debates in today's society is arguably more than not, it's both sides just screaming at each other and yelling at each other and hurling personal insults, and never once using actual hardcore facts and evidence and data to back up either of their positions. It's a thing with any debate on any issue in today's world. Obviously, especially politics. But Star Wars and the JFK assassination, those are just the two examples that I'm personally connected with and have a lot of knowledge of and attachment to, and background knowledge and experience with. Okay? So, again, just the crazy thing is, the fact that both of those topics are still being debated, and it seems like almost nobody can agree. But, on the bright side, in both of those topics, the majority, are pretty obvious. With Star Wars, the majority of fans are very positive and funny and passionate and know so much, arguably more so than me, because personally I'm just a fan of the movies and the shows, but there are an overwhelming majority of fans who know all of it, who follow the books, the comics, the games, the movies, the shows, everything, who know way more about it than I do, but they've never insulted me or attacked me for just liking the shows and movies, but, are very open-minded and very cool, very positive, very down-to-earth, and are so willing to have a positive discussion because at the end of the day, we love the same franchise. And as for the toxic haters who hate on the new movies and who did hate on the prequels, they're really only the majority online and on social media where they can get away with saying anything. But in person and in real life, it's the people like me who love it all that are the majority. And as for the JFK assassination, the people who believe Oswald was guilty are really the majority in certain sections of social media and of the internet. Believe it or not the entire internet. The difference between the Star Wars fandom and the JFK assassination community is that both in real life and on social media, those who believe conspiracy are the overwhelming majority and really have always been. And in fact, according to the last poll taken in 2017, 61% of Americans believe conspiracy, while 33% do not. And I mean, that's the bright side of both of those topics of Star Wars and the JFK assassination. At least the side I agree with and I'm a part of is the majority in both of those topics. So, but yeah, I mean, just the constant debate and attacking and immaturity in both of those topics is ridiculous, and I think it needs to stop, but realistically, it probably never will. That's just because of the widespread knowledge and controversy around those two topics. But anyway, that was my little rant and I guess you could say 2 cents about the existence of trolls within those two topics. And have arguably, I guess you could say, in my opinion, a greater amount of trolls than literally any other topic. And that's saying something. So yeah, if you guys like the video, let me know. See you later. Bye.